a little bit different from last month. There's now 2 minutes instead of 3. So our first speaker, let's see, Darcy, I don't see your name, but if you'd like to proceed.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, committee members. My name is Darcy Kitching, and I serve as Executive Director of Boulder Chamber Transportation
Excuse me, I
Connections.
hate to interrupt. Is it
Oh,
possible for you to speak a little bit louder? I can't hear you.
sure. I'm sorry. I will. Let me start again. Can you hear me better now?
Yes.
A little bit better. I think that's all I can do to change my settings.
Oh, this is good. This is
Okay.
good. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Darcy Kitching, and I serve as Executive Director of Boulder Chamber Transportation Connections. I'm here today to urge you to take today's recommended action to advance funding from the FISA reserves to support the projects associated with joint service. Doing so is both a fulfillment of a long-standing promise and a smart economic move for the Northwest Metro region, and eventually for the entire Front Range. More than 60% of the people who work in Boulder live outside of Boulder, and more than 70% of those non-resident workers commute alone by car. Boulder's employers tell us consistently that commute burden affects their ability to recruit and retain talent. Commuter-oriented passenger rail is an important solution to mitigate congestion and air pollution in the Northwest region. I attended the Front Range Passenger Rail Town Hall in Boulder last week, and I was deeply inspired by just how close we have come to making the first iteration of passenger rail service with the Colorado Connector a reality. The proposed starter service is not the full Fast Track's vision, but it moves that vision meaningfully forward at a cost that is significantly lower than originally projected. Importantly, the City of Boulder and other communities with stops along the joint service corridor are actively planning their passenger rail station areas now, which will contribute to those communities' economic vitality and jobs, accessible transit-oriented development and housing, making it easier over time for more people to choose not to drive between Denver and Boulder, clearing the air and increasing accessibility for everyone. As the Front Range Passenger Rail District prepares to go to the ballot, we need to keep joint service going strong to support the district's request for tax dollars and further build out of our passenger rail system. This is something people in Denver, the Northwest Metro area, and beyond have been looking forward to for a long time. I myself have been a fan of passenger rail since riding the California Zephyr from Denver to Colorado Springs with my family as a child, and I can't wait to ride the Colorado Connector between Boulder and the rest of the Front Range with my own son in 2029. Please take the recommended action today to advance FISA funding and continued funding support for joint service. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for tuning in today. Mr. Kroll, do we have any other speakers?
At this time, there are no additional speakers.
Okay.
However, there was one emailed comment, and that
Okay.
was from David Kerber regarding joint service.
Okay. Would you like to read the comment, or?
We typically just append the emails to the transcript of the meeting.
Okay.
We don't typically share the contents. I will say that Mr. Kerber's remarks were not in favor of joint service.
Okay, thank you. Okay, with no other participants in the queue, we will close the public comment period at this time. I do want to remind our committee, today we really have a very full schedule, and there's a lot of information that we're going to be receiving from a variety of folks. So just keep in mind that, we've got some limited time. We've got a meeting coming up at 5:30, and just keep that in the back of your mind as we try to move forward and get everything done today. We have one external entity report today. So this is from the University of Colorado Boulder School of Leads of Business for their semi-annual report. So CFO Mackey, would you like to introduce them and start the presentation?
Yes, thank you, Chair Banker. Kelly Mackey, Chief Financial Officer. As the committee knows, RTD's fiscal policy requires the agency to obtain independent sales and use tax forecasts to support both annual budget development and the 5-year financial forecast. To meet that requirement, staff partners with the Business Research Division at the University of Colorado Boulder's Leeds School of Business. Today, we're presenting the March 2026 Sales and Use Tax Forecast. As noted in the materials, this update reflects adjustments from the September 2025 forecast and provides critical insight into near-term and long-term economic conditions that influence RTD's revenue outlook. We appreciate the longstanding expertise that CU Leads brings to this work. And with that, I'd like to introduce our presenters who will walk us through the forecast results and the underlying economic trends. Please welcome Mr. Brian Lewandowski, Mr. Robert McNown, Mr. Miles Light, Mr. Richard Wapikind, and Mr. Adam Illig.
All right, thank you very much. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I assume you can see it at this point. I'm Brian Lewandowski. I'm the Executive Director of the Business Research Division. And I have one of our key members with us today, Dr. Robert McNown, and Dr. Richard Wabikind may be joining us shortly, but he's getting ready for commencement. So I'm going to,
Brian,
yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but it does look like we're getting some interference on your end from what's being shared. Okay, there we go. That's better.
Okay.
Now we can see the full presentation. Thank you.
Wonderful. So we've been working with RTD doing this sales and use tax forecast now for about a decade and a half. And when we do these presentations twice a year, we start off by talking about the economy and perhaps what some of our concerns about the economy are, or what some of the opportunities we see in the economy are. And then we will wrap it up with a discussion of the forecast. So I'm going to start out with the economic piece, and then I'll pass it to Robert to talk about the forecast specifically. So we always start with risks, and this is a rubric that we use. It's subjective, but this is a way that we think about and we're mindful of some of the risks that are present in the economy. So on the vertical axis, we look at the likelihood of something occurring, and on the horizontal axis, we think about the severity of that happening. And some of these things may affect the forecast on the downside, and some may affect the forecast on the upside. So right now, what's very much in the front of our minds is the energy price spike that's really related to the war in Iran. But there's a number of things that we are paying attention to, if it's federal government restructuring and how that's impacting Colorado, or tariffs, or immigration policy. So all of those are examples of changes that may have a more negative effect. But then we're also paying close attention to things like tax cuts, which are showing up in terms of higher tax returns already this year and should lower the tax withholdings for individuals as we go through the year. So that's something that can have an upside impact on our forecast and on the economy. So it's very fluid. We populate this a little differently every time we are thinking about a forecast. So there's three things I'm going to leave you with today about the economy. And one is that the economy grew slower than first estimated. So this is really showing you data from the Bureau of Economic Analysis in the gray shaded region. So that's all historical data. And then we have some forecasts from Moody's Analytics, which are important because they underlie our Colorado model and your RTD forecast. And what's notable, I think, when we look at the fourth quarter is, one, we came off the third quarter where we recorded 4.4% growth. And in the fourth quarter, growth slowed to an annual average rate of 0.5%. And in that report, I think on the upside, we saw growth in consumption and investment. We saw a decrease in government spending. But really, I think perhaps on the downside a little bit is we saw downward revisions to the GDP estimate. So the Bureau of Economic Analysis presents three estimates. The advanced estimate comes out right after the end of the quarter. And then as they're gathering more information, they revise it in the second and the third and final estimate. And what I've presented here is the revisions to the fourth quarter. We went from having growth of 1.7% or so, all the way down to growth of 0.5% in the third and final estimate. And what's notable here is we also see downward revisions to almost every component. So the consumption piece came down, the investment piece came down, government spending is strongly negative in all three estimates, and exports and imports both fell, but exports fell more than imports, which really mean we had a widening of the trade deficit, and that widening of the trade deficit detracts from GDP growth. So that's why we view this as a fairly negative GDP report. As we're looking ahead to the first quarter report, which we're going to get on April 30th, the estimates from the Federal Reserve, we have the GDP Now forecast and the New York Fed's Nowcast. They're ranging between 1.3 and 2.3% growth for the first quarter. So still substantially slower than what we saw in 2024 and the first part of 2025. So my second comment here is that employment growth was revised down, and that happened both nationally and in Colorado. Downward revisions or revisions at all are very normal for the Bureau of Labor Statistics to do. They happen at the state level about every March, and they announce them at the national level every February. So it's a very predictable pattern when they release this information. What was notable this year is the downward revisions were larger than usual. And they started revising back all the way to about 2024 and all the way through 2025. And it has a cumulative effect as they slow growth in March of 2024 and April of 2024. That's a lower base that we're growing jobs from. So by the time we got to this December 2025 number, we actually had 1 million fewer jobs in the US economy than what was initially published by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Now, the data that they used to generate this estimate, it's called the Current Employment Statistics. This comes from a sample of employers nationally, and it has tended to perform pretty well. But the Labor Department is also learning more information through a census of employers, and that information lags about 6 months. So as they incorporate that data, that's where these revisions come from. This is a larger revision than usual, but it's not unprecedented. As we look at growth, as we march through the years, I look at average monthly growth, and setting aside 2021 and 22, which were real recovery years from the pandemic recession, we get to 2024 and 2025 where growth really started to slow. In the revised data for 2025, the US only added 10,000 jobs per month. We had 5 negative months of job growth. And when we subtract off healthcare, we actually had 10 months of negative growth. So that illustrates the outsized share and the concentration of growth that was coming just from the healthcare sector. Growth has improved a little bit in 2026, though it is still volatile. We have a strong up month, strong down month, and a strong up month. And we're averaging 68,000 in this early data. But still, as we remove healthcare, it brings it down to an average of 12,000 per month. So it's still very concentrated in one sector. We look at this for Colorado as well, average monthly growth over the last several years. And for 2024, we were just above 1,000 jobs added per month. In 2025, it fell negative, minus 1,000 jobs per month. And January, we ended up adding 7,000 jobs from December to January. So this is very slow growth, very muted growth, and this is unusual for Colorado. So on the left side here, we're looking at the number of jobs added per year. On the right-hand side, we're looking at total jobs in millions from 2000 to 2025. And you can see there are several events where we are losing employment in the state, but all of these are really surrounded by recession. So this is coming in 2002, 2003. We were emerging from the dot-com bust, where Colorado was disproportionately impacted. In 2009, 2010, this was a great financial crisis. In 2020, of course, we had COVID. But what's unique about 2025 is we're not exiting or we weren't currently in a recession, and we still recorded negative job growth. And this was a phenomenon that was really happening in several states around the country in 2025. So very muted job growth environment. At the same time, we had decent GDP growth in the state and strong personal income growth in the state. So there's a little bit of tension when we take a look at some of these economic variables together. So my third and final point before I pass it over to Robert is that the current energy price spike poses a risk to both inflation and to consumption. So pointing out this energy price spike, we have the WTI, the West Texas Intermediate oil price daily average from 2010 to 2026. And this series we can pull from the Energy Information Administration all the way back to the 80s. the early 80s. And this is the fastest oil price spike, not the highest level, but the fastest spike that we've seen in oil prices in that history of the data. Of course, in 2022 or so, we had higher oil prices during that period. As consumers, we can relate to this in terms of gasoline prices. And for the nation, the gasoline price series from the EIA goes back to the 80s. For Colorado, it goes back to the early 2000s. And what we can see here too is that this is also the fastest gasoline price spike that we've ever encountered. Not the highest level of prices, but the fastest that it's changed. For the nation, they're up about 50% from January. And for Colorado, they're up over 60% from January. So we think about what that means to the consumer psyche, how they actually have to divert spending from other discretionary items to fuel, and what that could mean for their savings and outlook for the near-term future. The inflation report came out about a week and a half ago. We got the March data for the US, for the Mountain region, and for the Denver metro region. And what we can see on the left side of the chart here is this spike in inflation. And a lot of this is related to energy prices, but not solely related to energy prices. What's a little bit disappointing when comparing the local area to the nation is we are now averaging above the nation when it comes to inflation. In 2024 and 2025, we were averaging below the national average, but now at 4.2%, we're well above that national average of 3.3%. I think the other concerning component here is that our housing piece of inflation makes up about 45% of the basket of goods and services that we purchase. And it's rising at a much higher rate than the nation as well, even though we have really flat home price growth. We're 47th in the nation for home price growth. And we have falling rents in some parts of the Denver metro region. So that's a little bit confounding that piece is up so much. So of course, the Federal Open Market Committee is charged with the dual mandate of full employment and stable inflation, stable price growth around 2%. And what I just presented to you is the tension in those two variables that the Fed has to deal with. And so what are they to do in an environment where there's both very muted job growth and also rising inflation? And what they chose to do in March was keep rates steady without any cuts. The next meeting is in late April, just in about a week. And the expectation, at least in the market, is that prices will remain unchanged, and the interest rates will remain unchanged. But looking at this, the 30-year fixed mortgage average over the last month and a half or so has increased by 50 basis points. So it went from 6% to 6.5%. So it reversed trend going from the downward slope to increasing again. All right, so closing out with the retail environment. On the left side of the chart here, we're looking at national retail sales growth. And I also plotted here the Colorado taxable sales growth rates. And two takeaways from this. One is that the year-over-year retail sales growth was 3.7%, which is not slow. It still remains above the rate of inflation, so it's real growth. And it demonstrates that consumers are continuing to spend. The other thing I would point out on the left side here is that Colorado taxable sales, while not exactly overlaying the growth in national retail, they certainly do follow each other. And so what happens nationally does happen in Colorado. And this is really what Robert will speak to in just a moment, because we're statistically measuring several of these relationships between the state and the nation, and between your district and the state. On the right-hand side, we have the components of retail sales growth year over year. And one of my expectations was, in an environment where consumers are worried about inflation and they're worried about the job market, that we would see a shift in spending from discretionary items to things that they really need to buy. And that has not shown up yet in the data. And I think pointing out that sporting goods recorded the strongest growth, clothing had the third strongest, restaurants had the fourth strongest growth year over year, demonstrates that consumers are continuing to spend on discretionary items. And we can also take a look at the growth in taxable retail sales for all communities in Colorado from the Colorado Department of Revenue data. This is the state's share of collections county by county, and we can also take a look at this city by city. So it's an apples to apples comparison between these communities. And what we see is statewide in 2025, the state average was 1.9% growth in taxable sales. And there's quite a variance between the high growth areas and the low growth areas. So Cheyenne County, Crowley County, both rural counties on the Eastern Plains recorded really phenomenal growth, where Sedgwick, also on the Eastern Plains, and Conejos were posting declines. But look at our metro district counties. They're all sort of oscillating around that state average, but only one is above the state average, and it's Douglas County. So with that, Robert, I'll turn it over to you to share the update from the forecast.
Right, thanks, Brian. So Brian has really set the economic context for us to go forward and look into our forecasts. Remarkable that sporting goods, I guess, are considered by the consumers to be necessities, not discretionary spending there. But enough of that. So the point of this slide here is to show the relation between state taxable sales and district taxable sales for RTD. And you can see on the left there that they move together very closely. The magnitudes are quite similar, and that's remarkable, and that's something to keep in mind as we go forward, that what's happening here, in around 2026, it's not just that the district is suffering from low tax revenues here, but it's be expected for the state as well. And then if there's a little bump up, it bumps up for both the state and the district. On the right, we have use taxes, and a couple takeaways from this. One is that use taxes are highly volatile. It's a bit of a nightmare for the forecasting challenge, but we live with that. And the other is that this volatility is, you often see a pattern of reversals, and that could be that one of the primary drivers of use taxes is construction activity. And if there's a slump in the housing building sector, it tends to be reversed in subsequent years because of the housing shortages that have emerged from that reduced activity in the previous years. So, and again, we see that there is some common movement at the state and district levels. And then our next slide, Brian. So we'll get down to the real numbers here. So as Brian mentioned, the national economy is a key driver, an indicator of what's going to happen in Colorado and in the metropolitan district, the RTD district. But it's not lockstep by any means that the Colorado economy can move somewhat independently of what's happening at the national level, but there certainly is a linkage there. So it's a good place to start with the national data and the forecasts. And so 2024 and 2025, of course, are historical data. 2026, our current year, this is what we're looking at immediately in terms of our first forecast coming to you now. And so you can see that according to the Moody's scenario that we've selected, and we have selected a somewhat pessimistic scenario, mildly pessimistic, because you can see that most of the indicators, except for employment, show positive growth, and the labor market indicates some weakness here in 2026, and then also in 2027. The weakness continues somewhat. And finally, in 2028, there's a strong bounce back. As we go to the next data for Colorado, you can see that there's a similar pattern, but not kind of one for one. That in 2026, Most of the indicators in Colorado are a little bit stronger. The unemployment rate is not as high as it was at the national level. Percent change in employment, even though that's negative, it's not as bad as it was for the nation, or not expected to be as bad. Now, 2027, so this is quite a bit different. It's as if Colorado is leading the way out of the recession, that already 2027, the economic indicators are pretty strong, moderately strong. And then 2028, there's really some very strong growth, particularly in retail sales, which, as you can imagine, is a key driver of sales tax revenues. And this is for the state as a whole, not the district in particular. But it's a good indicator of what's driving economic activity in the district, and therefore RTD sales and use tax revenues. So in our next slide. So there's a lot of numbers here. So let's focus first on the rightmost column headed by growth rate. And so again, 2024 and 2025 are historical data. And you can see that this is total sales and use tax revenues and the rate of growth of those revenue sources. And you can see for 2024, it's actually negative, or basically zero, really no growth at all. 2025, again, a very modest performance, growth of 1.3% in your sales and use tax revenues. And now in 2026, what we're forecasting again is very weak growth of 0.6%. And then, as we saw in the previous slide, with the Colorado economy coming out of the weakness of 2026, in the following year, in 2027, we're predicting 3.7% growth in RTD sales and use tax revenues, even stronger in 2028 because of the stronger performance you saw in the previous slide. So 2026 is certainly disappointing. It's our current prediction for the current year is weaker, not by much, but weaker than it was what we were predicting in September of last year. So you can see instead of 877 million, it's 874. So a difference of only 3 million. And as a percentage, that's an error of 0.4%. You know, if we could always have such a low error, or difference in this case, then I'd certainly be pleased with what the model's doing. In 2027, even though there is a bit of a rebound here, a growth of 3.7%, it's not as strong as what we were anticipating back in September. Well, Brian has kind of anticipated that in his comments, pointing particularly to the war in Iran, the implications that that's having for the energy market, gasoline prices, other chaotic policy measures that are difficult to deal with. For example, now, of course, the federal government is beginning a program of paying back the revenues that were generated by these illegal tariffs, and doesn't seem that's going to end up in the pockets of the consumers. So you know, that's another. It's not great news. There may be a little boost in 2026 because of the tax refunds that people are experiencing now, but by 2027, then that's going to be history. So that's the overall picture. Again, the growth rates from 2027 on are not too bad, particularly compared to our recent history here. So on the right, you can see these. Oh, let's go back, Brian, keep it on that previous slide for a minute. So I just want to point out, this is over this medium run forecast going out a little over 6 years to 2032. And we present a range of alternative forecasts. The baseline that we've selected here, that blue line, is based on a mildly pessimistic scenario coming from Moody's at the national level. We like to present alternative scenarios in the forecast from those in case the budget committee or in case the staff feels that a more optimistic outlook should be considered in the planning, or maybe a more pessimistic one, which would be the red line. We also present these statistical bounds, the dashed lines, which basically there's a 67% probability that the actual outcome will lie between these dashed lines there. So keep in mind that you have all the information behind these alternative forecasts as well as the baseline itself. And then the next slide. So we're also charged with providing a long-term forecast going out 50 years. And again, we present statistical bounds on our forecast. And so as you can imagine, forecasting out that far is pretty challenging. The important thing that we can rely somewhat on forecasts of population growth and changes in the age structure of the population. And that is a key driver of what's going on far into the future. Now, of course, the confidence that we have in our population numbers has been kind of undermined by recent immigration policies, where now our population growth is considerably lower than what was expected just a year and a half ago. But in any case, we go forward with this as our forecast. You can see that it's not just a straight line forecast, that there are differences in our predictions of taxable sales in these decadal periods. And overall, then just sort of modest but steady growth. And finally, the last slide, Brian. So I just want to emphasize that we try to present forecasts that are based on the statistical model. We don't generally use add factors. If we see a forecast that seems a little unreasonable, we go back to the model itself and go back to particular equations and see if there's some explanation for that, or some structural change in the economy that requires that the model itself be changed and the equations be revised. And that way, the revenue forecast that we provide will be consistent with the underlying economic factors. And we think that's important. It's the best way to understand the revenue forecast is to see what's happening in terms of the economic forecast. And I hope I've laid that out for you, and Brian has as well. So we'd be happy to take any questions you have at this time.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Lindowski and Mr. McNown. Very important and interesting information. It's looking like next year might give us some hope, but this year is not looking so wonderful. Do we have any questions from our committee? Any questions or comments? No. Director Arcuri.
Well, I have a bunch, actually, so I think maybe I should just kind of prioritize.
Well, if you could pick a couple and go forward, because this is pretty important. And just a reminder, they will be coming back in the next couple of months to provide us with an update. And at that point, we'll also have more sales and use tax information that we can rely on and see where we're going. But I'm sorry, Director Arcuri, go for it.
Okay, I'm just going to mention something that I highlighted in my notes as I read through this. I read through the graphs that were just presented, as well as the forecasting model. So I will just ask this of Leeds, please. Please explain, personal income growth is not keeping up with inflation in 2026 and 2027, and employment growth is weak in 2027, even declining in 2026, yet retail sales are up 3.8%. So I'd like to see how you, or explain how you make those kind of make sense. And then also just to let you know, as you might well be aware, but when we compare your rates of growth of your sales tax revenue forecast with that of OSPB and Legislative Council staff, you are much more optimistic in the out years. And I realize that they work on a state fiscal year basis and RTD is on a calendar year basis, but I think that the general question is still valid.
Okay,
It's a general timeframe. Thanks.
Mr. Lewandowski, would you like to answer that, or Mr. McNeil?
Sure, maybe I'll take the second question first, if that's all right. And do you mind if I share my screen for another quick minute? So I made a comparison here. So we do read their reports as well, and we compare what both the Office of State Planning and Budgeting publishes and Colorado Legislative Council on a quarterly basis. So we looked at their March 2026 report and we compared it to what we published in your report. So here's Office of State Planning and Budgeting, here's Legislative Council, and here's the Business Research Division. On the left side, we have income, trade, and employment. On the right-hand side, we have sales taxes fiscal year and sales and use taxes fiscal year. So when I take a look at personal income, we're more conservative than both agencies for their forecast horizon. For retail trade, we're more conservative for the first 2 years, but we're more optimistic in 2028. And that's really a product of the sluggish growth scenario that we're using right now, and what happens historically after a period of really sluggish growth or even a recession is we have a strong rebound in activity. So that's what's driving some of this retail trade growth in 2028. When we take a look at employment, we're more conservative for the first 2 years, and again having this expectation of more robust growth in 2028. We're able to do this for sales taxes and sales and use taxes because we not only publish your revenue data on an annual basis, but we publish it on a quarterly basis so we can compare apples to apples. And what we found when looking at sales taxes in the very near term, in 2026 and 2027, we have lower rates of growth for sales taxes, and we're sort of in the middle for 2028. When we combine sales and use taxes, it's a similar story where we're in the middle, or we're lower than both agencies in 26 and 27, but we're in the middle for 2028. So that's how we reviewed what we produced versus what they produced. Of course, you're exactly right. We're doing this, the revenue piece, for the district, and they're producing these estimates for the state. And then on the left-hand side, these are all the state variables. Robert, do you want to talk about the first question for a few minutes?
Yeah. Can you keep your
Sure.
Can we go back to the Colorado Economic Indicators slide? I think this is the focus of the question, if I heard it correctly. So as I heard the question, I had a little difficulty hearing it, but I think the point was there's a mismatch, or certainly a mismatch in the timing between the growth in personal income and the growth in retail sales. And that's illustrated by the forecasts here. So what's happening, if we look at 2026, the growth in personal income at 2.4% is a little higher than the growth in retail sales. If that turns out to be correct, what that means is households are being pretty cautious due to the economic uncertainty of the current year. And so they're not even spending all of their personal income gains. Instead, they're putting a little away in precautionary savings. Now, in 2027, as the economy begins to look a little more robust, then it's the reverse, that actually retail sales growth now outstrips the growth in personal income. And so some of that savings that was set aside now is used to support this higher level of purchases of retail sales. And that continues into 2028 as well.
And I would also point out there that historically, the timing of these series are off just a little bit, where we see that even though we see strong income growth, say in 24 and 25, we still saw much weaker growth in retail sales during that period and pretty weak growth in employment during that period. So it's not unusual. We also think that there's a wealth effect happening right now with the stock market at very high levels, almost record levels. And this shows up in the consumer confidence surveys, where individuals with some money in the market, some access to the stock market, are currently much more optimistic than people who are not in the market. So we find that as sort of further evidence suggesting the wealth effect could be at play here a little bit.
Okay,
Thank you, gentlemen. That's very helpful.
Okay, any other questions or comments from the committee? Anyone from our committee that is on Zoom online? I don't see any hands raised. I want to thank you both for the information. It's looking like this particular fiscal year is going to be perhaps a difficult one to go through. But again, there seems to be a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel, which is good. I understand you'll be back sometime in perhaps October. And we're looking forward to a more rosy forecast back then so we can build our 2027 budget. We're hoping, crossing our fingers. So any other questions? Okay, with that, I want to thank you very much for the presentation. It was informative and essential for us to move forward with our budget.
Thank you very much.
Any other comments, by the way? Mr. Lewandowski or Mr. McCowan, any other closing comments? No?
I just want to say that we appreciate the feedback that we've received from the committee, and it's really useful for us to get your reactions to our forecast. Your questions are helpful for us going forward too. So thanks very much for working
Well,
with
thank
us
you.
on this.
And also, thank you for sharing the information from OSPB and Ledge Council. You probably know there are two of us now on the board that are former OSPBers, and I guess we've always sort of leaned toward governor's forecast versus legislative council. But either way, thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Let's see, that was our report from external entities. We've got two items on the recommended action agenda. So for the first action, we have the electronic fare collection system and back-end contract extension. And this is for the board to authorize the general manager and CEO or her designee to execute a 2-year contract extension with Masabi LLC to provide the software and support necessary for adding account-based ticketing, which is ABT, functionality for a total not to exceed the amount of $7,843,498 for the extension. Do we have a motion?
So moved, Guzman.
Thank you very much. Director Guzman, do we have a second? We need a second.
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 Director Larson, thank you very much. I would like to ask our CFO, Mackey, to present this item.
Thank you, Ms. Chair.
Yep, thank you.
Kelly Mackey, Chief Financial Officer. The item before you is a recommended action to authorize a 2-year extension of the Masabi contract for the back-end systems that support mobile ticketing, account-based ticketing, and Tap and Ride. As a reminder, Masabi provides the Just Ride platform that underpins our MyRide mobile app, stored value accounts, EcoPass, and College Pass functionality, and most recently, the Tap and Ride Open Payments launch in November of 2025. The system is fully integrated with CAD AVL, institutional partners, and third-party apps such as Uber and Transit. This extension is essential to maintain uninterrupted fare collection operations while we evaluate long-term fare system enhancements and prepare for a competitive procurement. The contract expires June 4 of 2026, and the additional 2 years gives us the runway to do this work thoughtfully and strategically. Mesabi has continued to meet all performance standards, including uptime, PCI compliance, and successful delivery of new features. Under the extension, the fixed monthly cost increases from about $165,000 to $174,000, with subsequent annual adjustments tied to CPI or 3%, whichever is greater. Total not to exceed cost over 2 years is $7.84 million, which includes both fixed platform fees and pass-through payment processing charges. This action ensures stability of the fare system our customers rely on daily while we prepare the agency's next generation fare collection strategy. And staff recommends approval for this item.
Okay, thank you. At this time, are there any directors who would like to ask any questions or make any comments? For those of you on Zoom, please raise your hand. I see Director Nicholson has joined us. Anyone from our Finance Committee first? Any comments? I see none. Director Nicholson, welcome to the Finance Committee. Go for it. What is your question or comment?
Thank you, and I apologize for not being on video. I just wanted to applaud staff for the work that they've done on this contract. Mesabi has been a wonderful vendor, and staff has managed this contract incredibly well. And I just think that, I know a lot of other agencies who've had issues with their fare collection and their technology stack around this, and we have not had those problems, and that is really, really wonderful. So I appreciate it. The deal is really good. I think it's at or under 10% across everything for cost of collection. So yeah, I just wanted to say how wonderful this work was. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Director, I thought I saw Director Guchenritter. Did you have a comment?
Yeah, I think I know the answer, but it's so kind of during this contract extension, assuming we extend, we would be figuring out a longer term solution and not intend to continue to pay Mesabi going forward. I think that's my question, is like at the end of 2 years, do we think we won't need their services as much? I'm not wording it very well, but hopefully you understand the nature of the question.
Okay, so for clarification, are you then suggesting that internal staff would be able to carry on? Is that?
No, I guess I'm at the end of the 2 years. What
Okay.
would the expectation be? I mean, would it be another extension?
I see. Okay. I see we've got staff person. Would you like to introduce the staff person, CFO Kelly? Or CFO Mackey, sorry.
Yes, Ms. Monica Treibel-Harkney will answer the question.
Monica Treibel-Harkney, Senior Manager of Revenue. So the answer is no, we would not pursue another extension. We want to, or we'll be entering into a new contract to be determined through competitive procurement. Now, that would open the market for various vendors, and we'll have to assess through that procurement process what's the best option for RTD. That could be Mesabi if they should win the bid. That could be, there's a few other vendors out there that could offer something very comparable.
Okay, great, thank you. Any other comments? No? Okay, thank you very much. So with that, I've also seen that Director Geisinger has joined us, so welcome. Thank you. So are there any no votes on this? Hearing none, Okay, looks like this motion passed. So let's go on to the next motion. The second presentation, second action is for joint service. 90% conceptual design and Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railroad Company term sheet. So for the Board of Directors to authorize the general manager and CEO or her designee to enter into all required contracts and agreements and incur cash expenditures up to $5.58 million with use of Fast Track's internal savings account, or FISA, reserves reflected as a designation of net position to complete 90% conceptual design for capital construction projects within the RTD district related to intercity passenger rail joint service along the Northwest Corridor, and to support the preliminary funding estimates for joint services negotiated with BNSF term sheet, subject to the board's future approval of a comprehensive financial and implementation plan. So, do I have a motion?
So moved.
Director Geisinger has moved. A second.
Second.
Thank you. Director Guschenriger seconded. I would like to ask the General Manager, CEO Johnson, to present this item.
Thank you very much, Committee Chair Banker, and good afternoon to all those that are assembled both virtually and here in this boardroom. As introduced, I'm Deborah Johnson, the General Manager and CEO. As the committee is aware, RTD continues to work in close coordination with state partners through the Joint Service Executive Oversight Committee, or as we refer to ourselves as the JCOC, to advance the development of intercity passenger rail along the Northwest Corridor. As you may be aware, this work stems from the authority granted to the JCOC entities pursuant to Senate Bill 24-184. This afternoon, the committee is asked to consider a recommended action related to a major joint service project milestone, progressing the corridor's engineering to the 90% conceptual design level. Reaching the 90% threshold will provide detailed documentation of project elements, infrastructure requirements, cost estimates, operating assumptions, and third-party coordination needs for joint services within RTD service network. The capital work within RTD service area includes enhancements such as train control and signaling, track speed and curve enhancements, the RTD tied-in connection, which is needed for intercity passenger rail operations, siding work, and for those that aren't familiar with siding work, considering we're on a freight railroad, we may have to pull trains over relative to the primacy rights regarding that type of heavy rail equipment. Layover tracks and station elements across the municipalities, including Denver, Westminster, Broomfield, Louisville, Boulder, and Longmont. Advancing this engineering effort positions RTD and the agency's partners to move into environmental review, permitting, and construction readiness, and supports future board decisions on funding, procurement, and implementation. As previously discussed during the Operations Safety and Security meeting that took place earlier this month on Wednesday, April 8th, the not-to-exceed cost to complete the 90% design package is $5.58 million. Funding estimates for RTD share include $156 million in one-time investments, inclusive of the $5.58 million design effort, and $10 to $12 million in annual operating costs. The 90% design work is also closely connected to the term sheet negotiated between the JCOC bargaining representatives and BNSF, which will be effectuated by the Colorado Transportation Investment Office, and outlines responsibilities, operating characteristics, cost allocations, and anticipated timelines for starter service, which is aimed at being in January of 2029. At this juncture, that concludes my remarks. You will find in your packet supplemental information, including the intergovernmental agreement, which this body authorized me as the General Manager and CEO to enter into back in June of last year. And more to the point, referencing April 8th, we had a representative from the state of Colorado, the senior advisor to the governor, that presented information, and that's contained within your packet as well. With that, Madam Chair, I will yield the floor. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Do we have any questions or comments from our Finance Committee first? Director Guzman.
Madam CFO, would you be able to tell us what the current FISA fund balance is as of today, or as of your last recording of it?
CFO Mackey.
Yes, thank you for the question. It is $192 million.
Madam Chair?
Yes, please
Following
continue.
up with the presentation, I want to be really specific. We're being asked to authorize 5.58 million for the development and the completion of the 90% part of this. But there were several different numbers that are thrown out, and in coordination with a conversation that's been ongoing for some time, the board still has not seen an operating plan from FRPR, who are our partners in this, and it's something that we've asked for multiple years, and it still has not been provided. I'm hesitant to do this, mostly because it seems like the straw man numbers that we were given by the state through this committee really do empty out the FISA fund in a way that doesn't make it meaningful for finishing other fast tracks projects. And while I am willing to entertain the conversation and have the discussion, I want to make sure that we're not going to get cajoled into or forced any further into making decisions that are going to further damage the agency and put the rest of our operations at risk. Considering what's listed in the agenda packet and the information that was here, this is not going to come straight out of the FISA. It will eventually make its way over there, but this is going to impact our immediate operations funding and our liquidity on a day-to-day basis if we authorize this at the end of this month. And we are already facing tough decisions as it is. So I have a lot of very heavy concerns before we move forward with this, and I hope that we can get some clarity or understanding. I want to do the right thing here.
I'd like to ask our GM CEO, Johnson, to reply, comment, add information.
Yes, thank you very much, Committee Chair Banker, Director Guzman. In reference to this recommended action, I will state from my vantage point as a transportation practitioner, relative to an operational plan, first we have to understand what it is that's before us, and we won't be able to get to that point if in fact we don't have an understanding from a conceptual design aspect. Stepping back a little bit, I want to share with the board and remind those that were here and inform others that weren't here. When the staff embarked upon getting a common set of facts from Northwest Rail, I came before this body and asked for a recommended action relative to leveraging FISA dollars as well as related to the 3 train per day scenario relative to Northwest Rail. By virtue of us doing that 30% design, that enabled us to make an informed decision relative to this entity being RTD, not being able to afford that on its own merit. While I recognize that $5.58 million isn't just surplus change, we will not be able to get to an understanding of what an operational plan sans having that money with 90%. So I just wanted to share that with all of you because there are incremental steps that need to be taken. So we collectively as an entity, but more specifically for the board of directors as a policy body, we need to have information to make informed decisions, or you all need to have that information. And sans this opportunity to further do design work, we won't have an understanding of what could be required as we move forward. So I just wanted to share that. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you. That's very important. Any other comments? Any other comments? I do.
Madam Chair.
Excuse me. Director Rusha, if you could.
Yes,
go ahead.
sorry.
Sorry,
Thank you.
I didn't see your hand. But.
No, it's all right. Thank you. So I have a couple of questions. I think for GMCO Johnson, if that's okay. So my first question, thank you. So my first question is about the term sheet and approval. It says in the packet that we will consider resolutions in support of the term sheet on April 28th. And I just want to check to make sure that's still on our agenda for next week. And the reason why I ask is because I feel like it's a little bit cart before the iron horse. I am fine with these, but these dollars need to be spent, but I feel like we're being asked to approve. I don't know. I just hope that Ms. Johnson can kind of get what I'm saying. I feel like we're doing a little bit backwards. So if you could just clarify a little bit what this timeline is in terms of concessions and agreements, that would be helpful for me. Then the second question I have is just recognizing that we are footing the bill for this aspect of the project. And with all due respect to our state partners, they have been a little bit late on their homework. Like we were supposed to have a finance plan and the bulk of a service development plan well over a year ago. Do we have is there anything that ensures that we are going to get what we paid for relative to the outside expertise and certain deadlines? Are we treating this like kind of like a grant, right, where there are terms and conditions to get our funds? Or is this, do we, for lack of a better term, hand off a check and then hope that the project management on the state side and their partners are able to complete this aspect of the project on time? And I apologize for putting comments into my questions. I'm not as eloquent as some of my colleagues. Thank you.
Quite all right. GM CEO Johnson.
Yes, thank you very much, Committee Chair Banker, and thank you, Director Rusha, for the question. As it relates to the term sheet, it was the intent to have it readily available. I am very certain that before this body will make a decision that that term sheet would be available to inform the action that is required relative to approving this before us. Secondly, as it relates to the $5.58 million, collectively, there is a fiduciary responsibility of the board as well as myself in my capacity as the general manager and CEO. And with any monies that would be provided, quite naturally, there would be certain aspects of what that money is being used for, considering that there would be the usage of a third-party engineering firm, and there would be expectations in terms and conditions as we move forward. So with that, I'll yield the floor, and if I didn't answer all the questions, then please advise me accordingly. And my lifeline here just passed me a note that said, yes, we would have an IGA with, CTIO, because CTIO, for all intents and purposes, is the enterprise entity. Hence, that's why the language states here, support of a term sheet. While I have been a representative of the JSOC relative to the negotiations, the supporting aspect is because that agreement is with the Colorado Transportation Investment Office as we move forward relative to what it is. So there will be agreements as it relates to work that's been done, work that's anticipated being done by a third-party A&E firm, and A&E being architectural and engineering firm. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Director Arcuri.
Thank you. This says for 90% design, is there going to be a 10% coming somewhere down the road that we would also expect for our consideration? And I'm guessing, just doing math, that would be around $560,000?
GM CEO Johnson, if you could respond.
Yeah, thank you very much. Director Arcuri, as it relates to 90%, I want to be clear that we specifically requested 90% because we already had 30% as we move forward, recognizing that that will give us more information relative to what an operating environment would consist of. We wouldn't be doubling back on the 10% as we go forward to get to 100%. That would come relative to the work that needs to be done along the railway to bring any type of service to fruition. The reason why it's specified as 90% because we wanted to have as close as possible with certainty about the projects that may be needed, since this is a freight corridor that we are leveraging, and we wanted to ensure that we had various aspects in play so the network could carry the most precious cargo, which are humans. And so the 90% will stay as it is as it relates to the next phase going forward with any environmental work that needs to be done and other aspects of making that passenger freight, not passenger freight, I meant to say passenger service operable.
Okay. Thank you. I see Director Arusha, you have your hand up. Do you have another question?
I do. Thank you, Madam Chair. So I just, again, I'm just looking at the packet and I think I know the answers to this, but I want to make sure we're all clear as to where we are. So pardon me, Ms. Johnson, but, the package states that the governing boards will advance capital expenditures based on 90% designs. A notice to proceed is given and that will be in December. And like, do you just clarify, repeat, stress, I suppose, that we have not given a preliminary sign off that we will, fund whatever is brought back. That's still conditional. And again, like I know we've talked about that before, but I feel like that fact is kind of getting lost in the conversations, especially within the public realm. And if I'm wrong, correct me. So that would be my first question. And then actually, I'll stop there. I can leave it there. Anything else, I'll follow up with staff. Thank you.
Okay, GM CEO Johnson.
Yes, thank you very kindly. There has been no board action, and in every engagement that I have had, I have made it clear that any type of financial commitment is contingent upon this board of directors. More to the point, where we are currently, $5.58 million relative to 90% conceptual engineering design. And going back to my previous comments, this is a milestone to get us to the next phase, which will enable an operational financial plan, because at this juncture, it basically is conceptual as well. And I can speak for RTD relative to the 90% design, because when we talk about being better together with our state partners, we already had 30% design. In absence of that 30% design, we wouldn't be this far, and that's not trying to be boastful, but it's pointing out that this corridor, this initial corridor, is more advanced than the others quite naturally, and that'll be the supplemental work, so it all ties in. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Director Arusha, do you have another follow-up?
No, thank you. That was great.
Okay, thank you. I see Director Geisinger. I think that's your hand. I don't have a.
Yes, my hand's up.
Here.
Thank you.
Yes, welcome.
I'm having some trouble with my video, but I just wanted to say that I appreciated Ms. Johnson and staff pushing to get this funding. It's a small amount of money to get us to 90% design, and really should be much more specific and clear numbers at that point, and make it easier for the board to make a decision. I think that at this point, the state has provided money for RTD and for this project through SB 184 and SB 230. The $156 million initial cost, if that's where we end up, will likely be coming back to RTD from the state just in the next 3 years or so. And I think there's so much moving forward on this. Front Range Passenger Rail does, as I understand it, plan to, or is looking at going to the ballot in 2026. It's important to keep this project moving, to show that is a tax that people should support, which would take over a lot of these costs, I assume. So but again, I appreciate us moving forward on this small step, and I hope that the committee will do that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments from our committee? Any others? I would like to at least make a couple of comments. My first one is sort of a question. I see this is going to be requiring some engineering time for preliminary engineering and design. And I can't help but wonder if some of our staff that we have here at RTD, I know we have engineers that we have on board. I don't know whether or not they've had any recent experience building rail lines. The N line would have been the last one. But I'm just wondering if we could find, as we go forward, any savings from this cost, and also to give our staff some additional experience if we could go forward and find out whether or not some of this work might be done internally. GM CEO.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, for the question. It's a good one. And we, when I say we, the JSOC as well as internal staff and I have had conversations with that. I think what's keenly important as we trek down this path, railway, that we wanted to ensure that when we got to a point that we were leveraging the same entity. There have been incidents and real lived experiences whereby you have two different consultants and you're coming together and you're trying to ensure that your designs align. In this vein, it's a lot more efficient to have one sole entity do it, hence the comment and the lifeline I got from my colleague to my left relative to having an IGA. We want to, with CTIO, we want to ensure that we're leveraging the same engineering firm as we go forward. Quite naturally, we will have our staff lend support in reference to validation and things of the like relative to things that are put forward, so we can ensure we're trusting and verifying and doing that validation that's critically important from the best interest of the agency and being a good fiduciary.
Okay, thank you. I do hope our staff can get involved. I would love to have them to dig into a project that hopefully would be fairly exciting, and they could also have new skills developed, and I'm sure they already have a lot of information that they could lend to the project. So thank you. The other comment that I just wanted to make, this is an important first step. Well, I guess it's probably more like the second or third step, quite frankly. This is an important project. I completely understand, believe me, our financial situation, but we have been working on this with a team for quite some time. The cost of the project has come down substantially, and I think by working with our partners, we've made some great progress, and I'm hoping we continue to make that progress. So with that, any other questions or comments? Are we ready for a vote? Would you like to, are there any no votes, or would you like to take a recorded vote? Okay, let's go. Okay, so let's start. Any? Okay, excuse me. So are there any no votes? Okay, so it passes unanimously. Thank you. Okay, we still have quite a bit of work ahead of us, but it's exciting. So now we're moving on to our discussion items. I've given this a fair amount of thought, trying to find a way to get direction from 14 other board directors on how to proceed with regard to the possibility of looking at some fare and pass increases. And it was at that point, talked to a lot of folks, talked to a lot of you all, trying to figure out an efficient but clear way to get information and direction from the board on whether or not we want to go forward and consider fare and pass increases. So what we did is we sent out a board survey, and we got a very good response. 11 board members out of 15 responded, and we did get some, I think, some clear information, some clear answers. So with that, I would like to ask Mr. Kroll to do an overview of the results of the board survey. Excuse me, and then we will have a discussion here on whether or not we want to continue to go forward. So, Mr. Kroll.
Thank you, Chair Banker. And for the record, we did get a 12th submission. Director Ruscia did submit, but it was after the time we went to press with our packet, so to speak.
Okay,
so
that's
as Director Banker mentioned, a survey was submitted to the full board, actually kind of late February, early March. The initial results, which were primarily those from committee members who had responded, were presented at last month's Finance and Planning Committee meeting, and this is the final results, as Director Banker did good work to encourage other board members outside of the committee to complete the survey. And so these results incorporate feedback not only from committee members, but also members of the board at large. So Director Banker, Chair Banker indicated a lot about the survey's intent and structure, and I'll just underline here that we went beyond asking questions just about potential fare changes, but also questions relating to budget format and legislative opportunities as well. And the goal is to identify ideas with broad support for further consideration, and I think that should be underlined here. Nothing in these results should be construed as a decision by the board. It's just teeing up opportunities for the board to learn more about things as you all progress in your approval of the budget for 2027. Three main takeaways from the survey results, including those responses submitted by members not on the Finance and Planning Committee, is that there is strong support for exploring fare changes. There is support for a budget process with options for the board to consider, and a separate path for approval of large capital projects, and strong support for examining further legislative opportunities to increase revenues. So I know that that was a topic of conversation when you all considered your position on SB 26150, and I believe at the time directors just felt as though there wasn't enough information to include some of those asks in the board's position, but that should not be construed as, you know, the board's not interested in learning more, because the survey results here indicate that there is interest by board members in learning more about those. With respect to revenue opportunities that directors were polled on, there were kind of strong, moderate, and little to no support for various things. Ideas that had strong support, no surprise, is partnering with external entities on capital projects to share in capital expenses and enhancing anti-fare evasion strategies. There was moderate support. The board members at large had slightly less strong support for this than the committee members, and this is a slight change from when the results were presented last month that were just the committee's results, and those are sale of excess land for profit and increasing parking fees. So exploring those a little bit further seems to be warranted by the survey results. And then there was little interest in further exploring debt restructuring for short-term cash savings at the expense of higher long-term borrowing costs, and hiring additional sales staff for past programs. With specific respect to fares, Director Banker and Director Arcuri, created this survey such that we got input on a wide range of, fare types that the agency has, and you can see the numbers here. They speak for themselves. And again, this is support to consider further, not any indication of an actual action by the board. With respect to budget format options, there is a lot of interest in having the board take a look at a prioritized or ranked list of capital projects, to have the board vote specifically on a multi-year capital budget in addition to a vote on the operating budget, to have the annual capital budget contain information on the amount of money projected to be spent in that given fiscal year, and to separate out capital carry forward projects from newly approved projects. I think that last one is something that is actually already happening. Numbers 2 and 3, I think, relate specifically to some of the work that Director Arcuri and Director Ruscia may speak about in a moment with respect to the fiscal policy amendments they are considering bringing forward for your consideration. And then number 5, present the board with multiple budget option scenarios from which the board will approve a budget, and to present pass-through grant revenues and expenses separately from RTD expenses and revenues. Again, that is something that I think staff is already incorporating, as you'll see that presented a little bit later during the special board meeting. There's a slide that I think clearly shows that the pass-through grants are separate. And then last 2 here, to approve projects in advance of their submission to the Denver Regional Council of Governments Transportation Improvement Plan. And again, already kind of bleeding through to what you all are seeing from staff, to provide more regular updates to the Finance and Planning Committee regarding grant applications. You will hear from Kieran Miletsky, just in a couple discussion items from now on that exact topic. And so getting that regular update is something that is already happening. And then finally, I'm going to speak quickly about legislative opportunities. So these were the 4 legislative opportunities that directors were asked to respond to: investment flexibility, fuel cost hedging, transit fees from tolls, and fare citation revenue. And you can see the various levels of support for those for learning more about them. That brings me to kind of the next steps here, which is given the results of the survey, Finance and Planning Committee Chair Banker and Vice Chair Arcuria are recommending the following steps. First, to work with staff to develop revenue estimates for potential fare increases to inform a board decision on whether to move forward with a fare study and associated equity analysis. That's anticipated for further discussion by this committee next month. And then work with staff to refine the budget approval process to incorporate enhanced review and separate approval of capital projects. And that's anticipated for further discussion by this group in July. And then lastly, work with staff to develop estimates for revenue opportunities associated with potential legislative changes, and to use that analysis to inform a decision as to whether to include those legislative objectives in the 2027 legislative program. As a reminder, you all, through your executive committee, review an annual legislative program. That's typically something that GM and CEO Johnson and Government Relations Officer Michael Davies begins soliciting input on around August for approval in that September-October range each year. And so having a conversation initially next in July on these topics should queue up and flow nicely with your approval of your legislative program later in the fall this year. And with that, Director Banker, that concludes my presentation.
Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Kroll. Any comments, thoughts? Director Guzman.
Yes, I want to speak to the format that we were given on this, particularly with respect to fare and fare programs, to examine further maybe my misunderstanding of the way the question was asked, but it was to explore. And I am one of the number of people that gave support to doing this, to explore. But that did not mean to raise fares. I want to be very, very clear about that. I think we need to explore the costs. I think we need to explore the benefit of this and the value to the community of where we're at with fares. There was a lot of work previously done when I joined the board to make sure that we made it easier to deal with. It wasn't as complicated. We got Zero Fare for Youth done, and I think we do need to talk about what our discounts look like. If we are going to move in a direction in this region where we are dealing with density, then there might be a need to talk about what an eco-pass or a neighborhood eco-pass looks like, student fares. All of those things are important to us. But I want to be very clear, my support to explore that does not mean it's a support of increasing fare.
Yes.
It's to understand what the return on investment is for a person who is standing at a bus stop and needs to pay when they get on the bus to ride. And so the language that was used was a little bit convoluted, maybe meant to be confusing, I'm not sure, but to me it was not clear that we were talking about just increasing fare. And I want to put that on the record. My support for examining this is that we need to understand better what our fare structure is and how it serves the people that we serve.
No, absolutely. You are in target. That's exactly our intent. I'm wondering, are you interested in, and by the way, I should add, Director Harwick has just joined us. Any other comments, just thoughts about how we proceed? Because we have been having some conversations with CFO Mackey, and she has also offered some suggestions on how we proceed. But any comments, anyone also on Zoom that would like to say? Okay.
Madam Chair, if I may.
Yes, Director Rusha.
Thank you. Can you see my video okay?
Yes, I can now.
Okay. No, it's I pushed a button and then I disappeared from my own screen. So thank you thank you kindly for recognizing me. I just wanted to just state that when we modernized our fare structure a few years ago, we still had some of the highest fares in the country. I did a sort of survey of fare structures from 15 other transit agencies, and we were still some of the highest in the nation. So I want to caution us about going to the fare box for revenue right now, because as we just discussed, people's pocketbooks are feeling the pain, and there is a demand elasticity question here. You know, at some point, the cost of the ticket is not going to be worth the cost of taking RTD. We also have a fare structure that says you can go 3 blocks or 36 miles. We will charge you the same. That's a little bit unusual. So I agree with Director Guzman that I am personally fine with seeing numbers. Like, data is good so we can make informed decisions, but I just want to caution us about getting like ahead of ourselves and looking to this as a significant revenue stream. There are always going to be trade-offs, and I think we would. I don't personally think that this is the time to be raising fares on folks, particularly if we are potentially looking at a 2028 ballot measure. But with that being said, I did want to thank our chair and vice chair and staff for putting these matters before us and starting these important conversations. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Director Harwick.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for letting me speak. I'm really interested in diversification of our potential revenues. And one of I've spoken to you about this, Chair Banker, and I'm kind of stealing this from our GM CEO through a conversation that we had. So I'm just going to own that this was not my idea originally. Maybe I've adopted it and adapted it, but I'm really interested in pursuing something alongside potentially Denver City Council and doing an additional event fee, a ticket fee that would be added on to everything from Broncos, Rockies, Avalanche, down to the DCPA, the DMNS, like looking at all of our venues. And when a person were to receive a ticket from any of these things, they'd be able to ride our buses and trains for free. So it's just, there's a term for it, like just show and ride.
If I may,
Yeah.
ticket is fair.
Ticket is fair. And so potentially doing something like this, and granted, I will admit that I used AI for this, but like this is looking like it could bring in something in the over $40 million range. And while that doesn't close our budget gap by any stretch of the imagination, this is something that could be implemented relatively quickly, is not really on the backs of our riders, and actually would also increase ridership, and even for concert goers. If we're looking at like a $1 at the low end or $2 at the high end, this is also not going to be terribly a burden for those people that are opting to go and have that activity. So this is just something I'd like us to consider, and potentially starting to work with Denver City Council at some point in the future, because I think this is a win-win for RTD, and a win for RTD, and a win for the city of Denver, and a win for all of our riders and concert goers.
Since you're speaking about this, I would assume
Director Guzman.
airplane tickets would fall into this category if they were flying into Denver or leaving Denver?
Interesting idea. Okay.
And not exactly what I was talking about events, and I mean, don't get me wrong. I would love to add if we can figure out how to get the FAA to let us add a little rider on top of those tickets, let's do it.
Okay, well, thank you. I very much like the idea, and I think it should be pursued. So 2 things for CFO Mackey. One of these things was your suggestion, which I really liked, because there's 15 of us, and we all know we've had some really long meetings trying to come to compromise on many different issues. So a suggestion was made to ask our staff to bring forward to the next Finance Committee meeting in May 2-3 options on how we can go about increasing our variety of fares, variety of passes, parking fees. If you could come back to us with some choices, with some options. My goal, of course, is to raise some revenue to help offset our deficit. I would like to, this is just me talking, others can chime in. I would love to see somewhere if we could raise between, say, 8 to 15 million. I look at things like, for example, EcoPass. Some of the information you had sent me recently. Back in 2019, the EcoPass was bringing in $33 million. Okay. Last year, we brought in 7. So it'd be great if we could start looking at some of those things and not just looking at the cost of a pass, but then how would we go about trying to sell more of them and market them. So I think that would be a great idea. The other related, oh yes.
If I may,
GM
please.
CEO?
Yes, totally support the request that you've made. However, if you could extend us some grace, because as we look at May 12th, we're at April 20, that's just in 3 weeks. And in reference to us doing legwork to bring you something informed, I would ask for some grace as it relates to a timeline with the workflow
Yes.
that needs to happen. So that's all I just wanted to share.
No, you raised a good point.
Thank
And
you.
it did cross my mind, by the way, that we're asking for a lot of information in a short time period. The second item that I'd like to ask our staff to consider would be some of the revenue suggestions that have been made, including the one that was just made by Director Harwick. We do need more additional information. So it would be great if we, once again, can ask our staff to pull together a 2, 3, 4-page discussion of the issue, what the revenue implications might be, and then most important, what steps would we need to take to get it implemented? So things like the ticket fare, I think is an excellent idea. Some of the things that were in the budget survey, things like the looking at how we go about purchasing fuel, looking at the possibility of adding a toll. However, I've learned from CDOT after talking to some folks and listening to a number of their meetings, they're struggling too with whether or not to go forward with additional toll revenue to fund Bustangs. So we need to open up discussions with CDOT and get their thoughts and whether or not they'd be interested in working with us on something like that. So there's a lot of information that we would really need to collect to go forward before we can, as a board or as a committee, make some suggestions and recommendations. So, you know, I would like to ask our staff to pursue these things. Any comments or thoughts from our Finance Committee? Yes, Director Guzman.
I always have thoughts.
That's good.
You know, we removed funding from advertising sales.
Yes.
And we could certainly recapture that
Yes.
at any point in time by allowing that to happen again on our system. I think it was a bit short-sighted, and I'm going to keep bringing it up every time we talk about raising revenues because I think we made a mistake and we should probably own it and make some changes there.
Good point. I think we need to relook at that. So we can put that down on our list too. Any other comments, Director Arcuri?
I think given the budget situation that we're in and the packet that we read for the meeting that follows this one made it very clear that the sooner we act, the better off we are in the long
Yes.
run. It makes a huge difference. I am personally in favor of raising fares. To what degree, I do not know. Not only because of our revenue situation, but also because if we do go to the ballot in 2028, I am of the opinion that voters will expect the direct users, the direct riders of the service to be carrying their fair share of the costs of the service that they are receiving. And we do have to be honest in that much of the RTD district what we pay is based on our sales tax, yet the service that we receive is right at the mercy of RTD and this board. So there's not always a a one-for-one correlation. So I do think it is important to give an honest look as we explore fair revenue. What is a fair share? And I think, you know, the equity analysis is something that helps us decide that. And I think that's more of an objective way than a subjective way. But subjective waves are very important as well when we consider things. But I think we need to look at things both objectively and subjectively. And a fair revenue increase could happen before 2028, right? Even if there is something on the ballot in 2028, it would not be effective until sometime in 2029, maybe even like halfway through 2029. And we need money in 2027. And so we need to be exploring options that are available to us a little more quickly. And I think it is critical, which I think we will all hear later this afternoon as staff presents
You raised
that
some
to
excellent
us.
points. Very good. Director Larson.
One thing that hasn't really been brought up is that we could refer a ballot measure to increase sales or property taxes to fund the gap that we have in 27. I think a lot of these ideas are good ideas and definitely worth looking into. I would also probably support raising fares, but a lot of them are sort of not all up to us, out of our control. And it's also unclear how much time it will take for some of them to be implemented.
Yes.
You know, the reality is we probably will be doing cuts next year unless we, you know, even if some of these might pan out to some degree. I feel we should give the voters the option to prevent that. If we refer a ballot measure, even if it's just for basically the amount that is the shortfall or the projected shortfall that we have, it would give the voters the opportunity to choose keeping service rather than sort of not. You know, right now they won't have a choice. They won't have a choice in 2027 most likely. The odds are we'll be reducing service, and I don't know why we don't give them the option not to do that. And, you know, I'm well aware that it's at the very least unclear whether or not it would pass. But if it doesn't pass, then we'll have to do what we have to do. And at least we can say, hey, we gave people a choice.
Okay, thank you. A quick question for our legal counsel. Ms. Snyder, my understanding, but correct me please, is that if we were to put any tax measure on the ballot, do we need legislative authorization or do we have the authority to do that ourselves?
Thank you, Madam Chair. No additional legislation is required for a sales tax increase. The property tax question, we might need to talk a little bit more about.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I see Director Nicholson, you've got your hand up.
I do, thank you. I just wanted to say that, you know, I think it is a reasonable conversation to have about the impacts of the choices we make when it comes to generating fair revenue on the quality of the service that we offer. Because, you know, like to Director Guzman's point, you know, we could put the big, you know, window covering ads back up. You know, would that diminish the quality of our service? We could play Pandora style ads constantly on our buses in order to recruit to get revenue that way. We could put a gigantic, you know, sign out in front of Blake Street. We could tattoo people's foreheads, you know, who work here. Like, I guess my point is nothing is free. And if we are going to talk about different types of ways to make money, there are very real downsides in terms of the quality of the service we offer when we do that.
Okay, thank you. I can tell when the time comes, we will have a rousing discussion around the board about how we go forward, but it'd be a good one, a healthy one. Director Chandler.
Thank you very much for letting me participate in the discussion today. I do have a point, though, that I think we are kind of jumping the gun with the COA that is impending. I think we need to walk through the COA first, decide what service goes where, what is needed. I think we're going to find additional potential savings and potential routes that are going to be either combined or, so, I mean, all this is really good, good discussion, but I think we need to really focus on the comprehensive operating analysis and work through that first. So that would be my only discussion point.
Okay, any other comments from Director Nicholson? Do you have your hand up again? Do you have another question? No. Okay, any other comments? Are we ready to move on to the next topic here, discussion topic? Okay, next item is our fiscal policy revisions. We're not going into a lot of we're not going into any detail today, but I think two of our directors who've been working on taking a good hard look at our fiscal policy just wanted to give an update and an overview as to where we are. So that is Director Ruscia and Director Arcuri. So Director Ruscia, do you want to kick this off?
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair. So if you all remember, a month or two ago, Chair Banker, well, actually, let me go back. A month or two ago, when we were at our retreat, there was consensus among committee members that we would take a more thorough look at our fiscal policy this year and have more director involvement in shaping that. And that was in response to some requests from directors about changing our budget presentation, some concerns about capital projects, asset management, and how we make these decisions and where the directors have a role versus staff role. And then just this overall consensus that this document was created well over a decade ago. It's been amended several times, but it's starting to look like a Christmas tree with a lot of ornaments on it. And it could just be a bit more clean and easy to read, similar to our bylaws that are undergoing a similar dusting. So Chair Banker asked Vice Chair Arcuri and I to take a look at our fiscal policy and highlight aspects where we feel we could use some improvement. The areas that we have focused on are budget presentation, some additional transparency measures to bring us in line with some of our peer agencies, simplifying some of our documentation so that it's easy to understand, but it does not remove critical information, and clarifying some points of our fiscal policy that might seem redundant or contradictory, and just overall streamlining a process and working in director and community requests. I do want to be clear that we did not look at our fiscal policy and our practice and in any way state that we're not in compliance or that there's been some sort of financial mismanagement or malfeasance. That's not that at all. We're just merely looking at governance and process improvement to ensure that the board can do their job, staff can do their job, and just improve alignment and collaboration moving forward. So I did want to be clear that, this is not like an audit. It's not a reaction to something that went wrong. It's more about modernizing and just kind of streamlining fiscal policy and, giving, like I said, taking a little bit of dust off the shelf, right? Because it was written well over a decade ago originally, and it could just use some tweaks. So with that, I would happily turn the floor back over to our vice chair or chair, and then perhaps Mr. Kroll might want to weigh in at the end, since he will be a instrumental partner alongside our leadership team in helping us get this back to you guys by June. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Vice Chair Arcuri.
Thanks, Joyanne. That was great. I'm just going to add in here, as I'm looking through the budget survey, there's a couple pages here on supported budget format options. I think some of that we can roll into revisions to the fiscal policy as well to make sure that all of your ideas get incorporated into that as well. And so now we're going to, in the near future, get together with the CFO to ask her for her opinion and her team's opinion, as well as if things we are suggesting changing made sense or not. So now would be a really good time, a great time, in fact, if it's sooner rather than later. If any of you have ideas on certain things you would like addressed or that you question in the fiscal policy, please let us know now. That would be very helpful. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Oh, yes, Mr. Kroll.
And just to build on that point, in the board report, the Director Rusha requested that any feedback on the fiscal policy be shared with Director Rusha, CFO Mackey, and the board office so that we can all stay on the same page as to what's being put forward for consideration.
Okay, thank you. The goal here is to have any revisions for our next meeting. But I also understand sometimes life gets in the way and sometimes things get postponed. But let's try to aim for the next meeting and see how far we get. Okay, any other comments on fiscal, Director Guzman?
Well, thank you for having us actually look at, read, and try to understand our fiscal policy. It's really important for this work that we do. I have a number of ideas about this, but I am going to highlight one in particular, and it is the one I think the board least wants to deal with. So I'm just going to bite the bullet on this one for everybody and say we have a certain number of funds that we need to keep by legislation. We have other ones that make sense because we do operations and capital, but we do have an account that's actually a fund, and it doesn't make any sense, and it tangles everything up together, and I would love to see the 0.04% sales tax detangled from everything else and separated, because the FISA account, the way that it was structured, the way that it's funded, the way that it's used, makes everything eminently more complicated to deal with in our budget. And so I think focused, detailed work on detangling that from the rest of the funds and the budget would be so helpful to us. It also has become, frankly, an albatross, and we don't need it. It was a creation of the board. And as the gentleman who brought this forward and got it done would say in his lovely voice, that which the board giveth, the board can taketh away. So I think it's time that we really look at it and try to deal with that aspect of it. I don't know, I mean, look, CFO Mackey and I worked together last year very closely on this committee. There's a big difference between an account and a fund. And so we need to be very clear about what we're talking about, what we're using, and what it means, because they mean different things to different people. And if we don't own our work and our business, other people like to make stories up about golden geese laying eggs somewhere in the basement of RTD, and it doesn't exist. And money can only be spent once. So I would love to focus on that particular piece of our fiscal policy, please. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I personally would also like more information on that, and that was been on my to-do list for quite some time to better understand. And I know the budget formats have changed a little bit from previous year to this year, but I think that's a good point. Okay, any other comments about fiscal policy? Okay, with that, we will move on to the last item on our agenda, which is not the last, but extremely important. And so this is, see, I know I'm going to try again, Mr. Moletsky, if you would like to give us a report on where we are with our grant applications.
I would love to do that, Director Banker.
Did I do okay, or am I still off?
No, you did perfectly.
Okay,
that was exactly right. Thank you for the introduction. My name is Kieran Moletsky. I am the Director of Long Range Planning here at RTD, newly in the role, and I'm very eager to be working with you all in the Finance and Planning Committee on this and hopefully many other topics going forward. I'm here today to provide you with an update as requested by this body on our grants, both strategy and process, as well as some ongoing and upcoming pursuits related to grants to give this group visibility on how we go through that process and some of the opportunities upcoming, as I know that's very important as we talk about the broader budget discussion. This conversation today will talk about both the process, sort of what we do, how we go through the grants approval and pursuit process, as well as where we are with some of our current and ongoing pursuits. The good news is you do not need to wait for me to come talk to you about these grants updates. We will continue as staff to provide regular updates to this body on our grants efforts. Those include, we've already started some of those, you've seen those in the past several months, including some specific notifications on major grant programs, as well as what we launched starting in the beginning of this year, a quarterly update that GM CEO Johnson sent out, giving you an update on the status of our various grant pursuits. You'll see another one of those in the coming weeks here as we enter Q2 of this year. We do have a very rigorously defined internal process for the pursuit of competitive grants. As the lead of the grants task force, I am responsible for overseeing that process, shepherding our grant opportunities through this process, and that's really designed to maximize the opportunities out there, make sure we're not missing things, make sure that the projects that we advance are those that are the best fit for the grants from both a competitiveness standpoint and an alignment standpoint with, you know, our fiscal policy, with our broader programs. And that's really designed to equip GM CEO Johnson and others on executive leadership with the information they need to, you know, make approval decisions about the grants and make sure we're being responsible as we go through that process. Certainly want to acknowledge that no process is perfect. We talked, I know you just talked about it as it relates to the fiscal policy of this body, that, you know, we are continuing to seek ways to improve our grants process, to be adaptive to the changing landscape of grants, and that's both positives and negatives, right? As we respond to changes in funding sources on grants, as well as, you know, changes in our needs for how we want to approach grants. So there's a lot of components of that process improvement. This is mostly, I want to make that commitment to this group that we are working through those improvements. Those include a few things, but I want to highlight most of all the strengthening of our existing project pipeline. We know what our needs are, right? And so the strengthening of that infrastructure pipeline is really about making sure that those projects, those needs that we've identified through the AMP process, through other processes that exist, that those needs are grant ready and that we are, you know, advancing them in a proactive way for our grant opportunities. And we're doing that mostly through the realignment of the Planning and Infrastructure Services Division, which gives us a good way to improve that project pipeline. Everyone in this room hopefully is aware, you know, RTD of course has a really strong history with competitive and formula-based grants. We have been, you know, as all transit agencies in this country are, we rely heavily on grants, and RTD has pursued, you know, hundreds of grants over the past 15, 20 years, has been successful in securing more than $150 million in sort of standard discretionary and competitive grants, and another $1.4 billion through FTA's Capital Investment Grant Program, a program we continue to track very closely and are, you know, working through successfully on the Colfax BRT project as we speak. We also are regularly in communication with our funding partners to understand where those opportunities might arise. That's true at both the staff level and the executive leadership level. And we administer many formula programs on an annual basis that give us visibility to those partners and opportunities to leverage those formula programs as well. Grants are, of course, not free money. There are a lot of challenges associated with, or grants bring a lot of costs with them. We have to be very careful. It's not just that they can be applied to any project at any time. Major federal programs often require a lot of lead-up staff time and sometimes technical expertise that lies outside of our staff. That's very common across, again, the industry. So that's something to consider. There's also the physical cost of match requirements. As an illustrative purpose, we have up here, you know, $10 million requires approximately $2 million local. Technically, it would be $2.5 million for most grant programs where they require a 20% local match. So that's certainly something to consider. And then finally, grants have strings attached to them, and sometimes those are quite onerous, sometimes those are in keeping with what we're already doing, and that's the importance of making sure we're identifying the right grant projects where those strings attached to the grants aren't going to change the project in a way that is detrimental to our goals. Just to kind of, we wanted to give a little context for what grants mean in the broader scope of RTD's budget picture. Currently, as I mentioned, we've always had grants as a part of the mix. We always will have grants as part of the mix. We currently have a slightly greater than maybe standard share because of that Colfax BRT pass-through I mentioned that I know has come up in this committee many, many times. But the important thing about this is that, grants are a small but not insignificant percentage of RTD's approach. And again, we understand that and continue to pursue grants to make sure that that's filling its share of the budget hole. Next, I want to get into a little less big picture, a little more of the specifics of where we are with some recent grant pursuits. I'll go through sort of recently awarded grants at the federal, state, and regional level, and then some of our pending grant submittals, as well as some upcoming programs we're tracking very carefully. First, our federal recent awards. As I don't need to tell this group, some of those federal programs have had more challenges recently or have had less funding associated with some of the priorities of the modal administrations currently. But we were able to secure a cybersecurity grant from FEMA recently that will help us with advancing some of our cybersecurity planning. At the state level, as you are all familiar, we've been very successful in working with the Clean Transit Enterprise to secure funding from several of their newer programs, including the transit operations funds from SB 230, which we have an executed grant agreement for as of a couple of days ago. So that's a great win for us. Last night, there you go. Time flies when you're having fun. So that's something that we've been recently awarded, and we are looking ahead, you'll see momentarily, to future years of that program where it will be a significant portion of our operating funding. We also have secured recently an award from the Clean Transit Enterprise for upgrades at one of our maintenance facilities. So certainly an important partner for us. And then finally, on the recent award front, I wanted to highlight an award we received recently from the Denver Regional Council of Governments, or DRCOG, for a technology project to improve our app integration. And they too are an important partner that has a lot of funding sources that we leverage regularly and will continue to explore. Moving on to applications that we have submitted and are waiting on notification for. Those include both the state and federal programs and range from, as you can see there, fleet replacement to more technology efforts, as well as some state of good repair improvements at our maintenance facilities through the congressionally directed spending opportunities. So we are certainly remain active and will continue to provide updates on the status of those awards through those quarterly updates. Finally, on the, where are we in the grants pipeline, I wanted to offer a walkthrough of some of the funding opportunities coming up at both the federal and state level. I did want to acknowledge this is just very high level. This is not everything that's on our, we've got a very large spreadsheet of grant opportunities, and we continue to talk with these funding partners to understand new changing ones. But just to highlight that, a major program that has historically provided funding to RTD is FTA's Bus and Bus Facilities competitive program. We have averaged historical award amounts of approximately $10 million from that program. Important to note, though, that that program, we are uncertain about exactly the status of that program this year. Some of those funds were actually awarded last year from this year's pot, and there's some other reasons why we don't know exactly what that will look like. But we will be ready. So we are tracking that program, and as we learn more, we will certainly be ready to advance a grant application for that program if the opportunity does arise. Similarly, many of the other discretionary grant programs are subject to the current negotiations related to the Surface Transportation Reauthorization Bill. So I know we have a really strong presence with our federal delegation. GM CEO Johnson was in DC last week and may have more insights than I do on the status of some of those negotiations, but we certainly are tracking the federal programs very closely to see where there are maybe opportunities for us. On the state side, the state, as I mentioned earlier, has become a really important grant funding partner to RTD. It always was, but with the passage of some recent legislation, most notably SB 230, it is, starting next year, may in fact be our largest source of grant funding. the state that is. So we will continue to work very closely with the Clean Transit Enterprise as well as other enterprises within CDOT that have grant funding opportunities for where RTD is eligible. Those include the Local Transit Operations Fund, which, as I mentioned, increases to approximately $40 million for RTD starting in 2027, as well as the funding sources coming out of. There are some other components of the SB 230 funding that we will continue to track very closely, as well as the SB 184 funding which is currently facing some legal challenges, but is something that we're tracking very closely for its opportunity to provide funding for RTD. Just sort of wrap this up. We have I wouldn't say an aggressive, we have a proactive grant strategy that we are continuing to refine. We understand the need to make sure we're leveraging these funding opportunities. And the biggest thing about that is we know it's very important to align those grant opportunities with our existing needs and not create new obligations on the agency, but rather use them to advance the needs we've already identified. And then grants, like so many things, it's so important that we leverage our partnerships. That's true with both the funding agencies themselves to understand what their needs are and how we can meet them to get the most funding possible, but also looking at opportunities to partner with other agencies to leverage grant programs more effectively. So that's sort of the overview on where we are with grant programs. And at this point, I will turn it back over to any questions.
Okay, thank you. Comments, questions on chasing grants? No? Okay, sounds good. Director Guzman.
Thank you. Mr. Maletsky, thank you for the presentation. I appreciate the work on it. Two things to point out, and I know we've talked about this in budget preparation last year. Because we can hold federal funds, sometimes we are a pass-through agency for other projects, which can make our number for grants look inflated in a way that is not helpful necessarily, even though we understand it, not always as transparent as it could be. So I think that's something to consider for budget preparation this year. I only brought that up because the pie chart with the grant funding specified that we can hold grants like the Colfax BRT, East Colfax BRT project, and that's not our project, right? So we're simply the pass-through on it, which was understood when we got it every step of the way, but still causes confusion when it's looked at. And so I think that that's really an important thing to remember while we're doing this. And gosh, I would really like it if it wasn't a grant opportunity from the state, but directed funding to public transportation instead of having to chase after grants every year. So maybe that could be part of the legislative work that the executive committee takes on.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments, Director Arcuri?
Thank you. I'm looking at the slide that says near-term federal funding opportunities, and some of those might be at risk, it looks like, based on your presentation. Are these amounts what we would typically assume already included in our 2026 budget?
No.
If I may, Madam Chair?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. And thank you very much, Mr. Maletsky, for your detailed presentation. So pursuant to our fiscal policy, we do not include grants that we don't have. There's two types. We have formula funding that we get, and then the discretionary programs, which Mr. Maletsky referred to. And more specifically, I can speak to the aspect here about the status of 5339, which are bus and bus facilities. I have regular meetings with the FTA administration, and it appears at this point in time that there may not be a NOFO, a notice of funding opportunity for that grant. As we know with the current administration, that things basically fluctuate, and that's why we wanted to broach that here in this forum. And then more to the point with reauthorization, considering the collective discussions that have ensued, and with midterm elections coming up, it does appear to be highly probable that that will be taken up after the midterm elections, and quite naturally, the federal government is on a fiscal year that commences October 1st through September 30. So that means that there would probably be a CR going forward into the new year. So no, no. So what I'm just for your edification, bus and bus facilities is 5339. It's a discretionary program. RTD received monies that are formulaic, and those that are discretionary What is indicated on the slide on package page 173 is from a historical vantage point that RTD has been generally successful with the pursuit of that discretionary grant program. More to the point, that may not be available for circumstances that extend beyond RTD's ability. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments or suggestions or whatever? Okay, great. Let's move to other matters. Are there any other matters that folks would like to discuss? Okay, with that, I'd say we're pretty close to being on time. So as a reminder, the next Finance Planning Committee meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, May 12th. At that meeting, we will consider actions related to fair study and equity analysis, the 27 fiscal policy, bus procurement to support ongoing Colfax BRT project. Additionally, we will hold discussions on the following: our 26 financial performance, 27 budget development, and bus stop infrastructure and accessibility assessment final report. So seeing no other discussion, do we have a motion to adjourn? Second? Second. Okay, we are adjourned. See you in 20 minutes back here. Thank you.